Hey, it's Philmeyer. Let's talk about Paladin on controller. With shield in one hand, you protect your party. With sword in the other, you punish those who would do them harm. Honor, valor, justice. You are a Paladin. I ran a poll asking which tank job you'd most like to see a layout for, and Paladin wasn't your top pick. Still, I decided to kick off the tank block of videos with Paladin since it has the most actions out of any tank job right now. That makes it a great starting point to define a common layout template. My general approach to the layout is to keep the global cooldown actions, which make up the core attack rotation, on the base hotbar's face buttons. That way I can keep moving while working through those attacks. For my setup, I use 2 cross hotbar sets, which requires at least 3 hotbars. The first set handles single target attacks, while the second focuses on AoE attacks. I switch between these sets by tapping the right shoulder button, which is a behavior you can enable in character configuration settings. Let's walk through each action assignment, then take a step back to look at its overall flow and some adjustments you might want to consider. On the base hotbar's right trigger face buttons are Paladin's basic attacks. Fast Blade, Riot Blade, and Royal Authority are fanned out on the single target set. On the AoE set, these get swapped for Total Eclipse, Prominence, and Shield Lob. Now, Shield Lob isn't AoE specific, it's a ranged attack that is also important against single targets, but I keep it on the AoE set for 2 main reasons. First, Paladin has 1 less basic AoE attack than single target attacks, so there's just an open slot here. Second, Shield Lob is great for pulling enemies during dungeon runs, but you'll likely follow up with AoE attacks to grab aggro. This setup means that you'll switch hotbar sets more often when alternating between single target melee and ranged attacks, which does raise the learning curve. After experimenting with other placements, I still find this setup works best for me. Shield Lob often gets used several times in a row, so keeping it on the base hotbar makes it easier to reach. I'll also discuss an alternative to this later in the video. The bottom button on both layouts is Circle of Scorn, Paladin's damage over time off global attack. This placement makes it easy to weave between main attacks while repositioning in combat. On the right trigger's D-pad, I keep related off global abilities. These stay the same on both hotbar sets, allowing smooth weaving between primary attacks once I'm stationary. Since Interject and Low Blow both interrupt enemy abilities, I keep them easily accessible on the base hotbar. When I spot an opportunity to interrupt, I want those ready to go. Expiation is an off global that can be used between primary attacks. I tend to favor the right D-pad button for actions like this. Fight or Flight sits on the left D-pad button. Since it changes into Goring Blade after activation, grouping it with the other single target attacks makes sense and gives flexibility for when to fit it into the rotation. On the left trigger's face buttons is where I've placed Paladin's higher level combo actions. Atonement sits on the left face button. As the start of a combo chain that uses the button multiple times, it deserves a face button. The same goes for Confiteor, which I've placed on the top face button. Holy Spirit and its AoE variant, Holy Circle, are on the bottom face button. Since they're powered up after finishing Paladin's basic single target or AoE combos, they are used frequently, so this is a great spot. Intervene, Paladin's gap closer, is on the right face button. I like to keep gap closers here across my layouts whenever possible. Having it on a face button lets me maintain movement right up to the moment I activate it. This is particularly helpful when my target isn't initially within activation range, allowing me to close in on foot before dashing the remaining distance. Now, on the left D-pad is where I've placed Imperator, which enables the Confiteor combo. Keeping them on the same trigger makes them easier to hit in sequence. The remaining D-pad slots hold several mitigation abilities: Reprisal, Rampart, and Bulwark. These have shorter cooldowns compared to the remaining mitigations, so I tend to use them more often, making the base hotbar a good spot for them. While most instant abilities can benefit from face button placement, I think it's less critical for tank mitigations since a tank usually leads combat positioning rather than reacting to it. Keeping these core defenses on the base hotbar makes them easier to activate when needed. Now let's look at the double cross hotbar, starting with the right trigger's face buttons, where I've placed Guardian and Hallowed Ground. These mitigations have longer cooldowns, so the double cross hotbar feels appropriate. Having them on face buttons makes them easier to hit if I'm already moving, though, as mentioned earlier, access while moving usually isn't as critical. Provoke is on the bottom face button, so I can grab an enemy's attention even while sprinting. I think it's essential to keep this accessible, but since I prioritize main rotation attack skills on the base hotbar, Provoke lives here instead. On the final button in this cluster is Shield Bash. Its usefulness fades as Paladin levels up, but it still remains valuable for interrupting enemy AoEs in dungeons. Since it's a global cooldown action, timing is key, but it's not limited by a separate cooldown like low blow. I keep it on the double cross hotbar where it is accessible, but with lower priority than other attacks. On this trigger's D-pad are Shirk, Passage of Arms, and Arm's Length. Passage of Arms requires a Paladin to remain stationary, which makes it well suited to a D-pad slot. On a personal note, I think this is one of the most satisfying abilities in the game. When your party stacks up behind you and you raise your shield to protect them, it's a moment when you really feel like the party's guardian. Arm's Length provides knockback prevention and a slow effect on nearby enemies, making it a useful defensive tool, but since other skills take priority, it fits well here. This D-pad slot is also the same spot that I keep Surecast on caster jobs, which helps with muscle memory across my layouts. Shirk rounds out this cluster. It's very important, but its use is specific to party situations with another tank. In a full party, your co-tank defaults to party slot 2, so you could wrap Shirk in a macro to skip the need for manual targeting. But be careful, if you accidentally hit the button when in a light party, you'll be dumping aggro on your healer instead. On the left trigger's face buttons are all of Paladin's oath actions. Sheltron sits on the left face button since it's used frequently for self-defense. Keeping it on this slot lets me activate it anytime I need it. Intervention and Cover take the next 2 slots. Even though they both require party targets, I prefer keeping them on face buttons. Doing so allows me to target a party member first, and if I'm not within skill activation range, I can move closer and hit the button as soon as it is feasible, all while maintaining movement. I also find myself using these most often on the party's healer or co-tank. Assist targeting can help with the latter, which I'll talk to again shortly. The final face button is Divine Veil, a party-wide shield that doesn't need a target, perfect for a face button. On the last D-pad cluster are Iron Will, Clemency, and an emergency potion. Iron Will doesn't need frequent access, so this spot works fine. Clemency, while helpful and important, is a single target heal that won't be used as often as other actions. It's here for when I do need to help my healers during tough situations, including keeping my own health up if they are ever overwhelmed. That's the core layout, designed to keep combat flowing smoothly on the base hotbars while keeping the full kit accessible. With some hotbar slots still unassigned, there's room for consumables or tweaks if you want to personalize it. Now on my left and right stick buttons is where I keep my sprint and assist targeting macros by way of macro slots 98 and 99. This is something that can be configured in system configuration settings. I keep assist targeting on one of these stick buttons because I tend to play healer the most. As I mentioned earlier, assist targeting is still useful for tank, but if keeping consistency for healer is not your thing, you may just want to use one of the stick buttons for target lock-on instead. Speaking of lock-on, I have it assigned to one of the face buttons on my extended hotbar, along with additional targeting macros and limit break. The extended hotbar can be set up in character configuration settings, and these are similar across my job layouts. Now, just a few extra tips before we wrap up. Since I have the mitigations spread across different hotbar sections, I use standard hotbars to track their cooldowns. That way I can glance down at one side of my hotbars and quickly see what's ready. As I mentioned at the start, this layout does have a high learning curve. Paladin has a lot going on: single target and AoE combos, ranged attacks, multiple defensive tools, and even healing. Because Shield Lob is on the AoE hotbar, you'll be switching sets more often than with my other layouts, but I think it's worth it for dungeon pulls. If that placement doesn't work for you, here's an alternative. Move Shield Lob up to the double cross hotbar so it's accessible on both the single target and AoE hotbar sets. Then move either Guardian or Hallowed Ground to a D-pad slot. Whichever way you go, it'll take some practice to get comfortable. Additionally, there's some flexibility in where the various off-global actions can be placed on the D-pad. I've arranged them in a way that I feel makes most sense in a typical battle, but if you'd want to optimize placement to facilitate max DPS output, you could consider swapping a few. For example, if you prefer to streamline activating Fight or Flight and Imperator around the same time, you can swap Bulwark and Fight or Flight to keep both on the same trigger. Before I close out the video, I'll run through an example combat rotation to show how the layout flows in action. Keep in mind, I'm just demonstrating function here and I'm not going for peak DPS. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. If this helped you out, consider hitting that like button on your way out or even sharing the video with a fellow controller defender. I'd really appreciate it. My next video will be covering Gunbreaker. I hope you'll tune in for that one. See you in the next one.